Welcome to Night Shadows. I'm Stewart Best, where the paranormal is normal, where that which you thought you knew, you didn't, and where the future can be known if you know exactly where to look.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and we're going to have a special show tonight. We have Barry Roffman with us, and he's a Bible code expert, among many other talents, and we have Larry with us tonight. Hi, Barry. How are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you tonight?
I'm doing fine. Larry, how are you doing tonight on the mountaintop?
Oh, doing okay, and so glad to have Barry with us tonight. I follow him pretty close, and I appreciate all the work he does.
Yeah,
well, Larry,
why don't we...
I'm grateful for what you've done, too.
Well,
why
don't we start with this Mars research that you've done? We've covered some of it before, but it's always fascinating for the people, or any other research that you really want to get into. I guess my first question would be, we know that NASA lies continually about Mars and the environment of Mars. It's obvious they do. Anybody that's really researched the pictures that come back and adjusts them, we suddenly have blue skies, et cetera, et cetera. What is your take on why are they hiding this?
Well,
part of it.
Okay, I kind of wanted a little bit to talk about the evidence for that. I'll get to that in a little while. But in terms of why, I mean, some people joke that NASA stands for never a straight answer. And basically, that is the case. I told you before the show, there have been a lot of things that we've discovered in the last couple days or so. One of which is the fact that the pressure sensor on the Mars Science Laboratory was advertised at having the ability to measure anywhere between 0 and just 11.5 millibars, or hectopascals. It's the same equivalent unit there, or size. And what does that mean? Well, on Earth, the average pressure at sea level is 1,013.25 millibars. So NASA's been telling us all along that the pressure on Mars is generally under 10 millibars, under a hundredth of what the pressure here is on Earth. And I had a new acquaintance in the past, I think it's week and a half, named Nathan Mariels from Global Electric in Oakland, California. And he contacted me. He'd read my report, and he said, by the way, were you aware, which I was not, that the Finnish Meteorological Institute that produced the pressure sensor for Mars Science Laboratory, also Phoenix, had a paper out before the landing, and in that paper they said the pressure sensor could read 1,025 millibars. Now again, they only advertised at 11.5, not 1,025. And I've been, up against NASA and the FMI, the Finnish Meteorological Institute, for at least 6 years now. Actually, up against NASA for 8 years since I started my research, and saying, hey, the pressure's got to be higher. And why'd you send such an inadequate sensor? Now we find out that actually they sent a sensor that could measure pressure like here. So to get back to your question, why? It really gets into stuff that is almost beyond my report, except in the afterward. To make it very simple, there's life that's not only been there and apparently is still there on Mars today, and we have some pictures of some of it that are in my report, taken on Sol 1185. That's 1,185 days into the Mars Science Laboratory. There was some green round stuff, perfectly spherical stuff rolling around. But they've had evidence before of life. Viking 1, Viking 2 both detected life back in 1976. And at that time, that's when Dr. James Fletcher, who was the director of NASA, when he saw the first color pictures from Mars come back with a blue sky and green on the rocks, he gave an order to manually tune the color monitors, every one at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. and he took the sky from blue to a reddish butterscotch color, and the green on the rocks was wiped out. And then they fought Dr. James Levin, ever since, basically, slowly giving into him with the idea that, Levin really did detect life on Mars with his level release experiment. Why? In 1967, this is not in my report, and by the way, the report is Mars Correct, Critique of All NASA Mars Weather Data. In 1967, there was an incident at Malmstrom Air Force Base where UFOs appeared over the base, and ICBMs were basically turned off. Had Fletcher, James Fletcher, had he allowed everybody to see what was there, and that the first thing that Viking 1 saw when it touched down on Mars was life, the implication would have been, well, there must be life all over the planet. And if that's the case, then UFOs may very well be real. And we were not in control of the skies when it came to controlling our ICBMs back then. And the government just made a decision, we don't want to go with this. We saw what happened with, I guess it was 1939 with Orwell, War of the Worlds, how people panicked, when they thought the Martians had landed. And they didn't want any of that at all. That's one major reason. After that, it became, a question of, when you start with one lie and then you have another one and another one, another one. Our report, our Mars Correct report, is right now 984 pages long. It's about 135 pages of discussion. The rest is all data, and it all proves that NASA's wrong. But what does that mean? That means that people like the European Space Agency, when they launched their ExoMars 2016 the previous year, and it crashed on Mars in October last year. It crashed because they didn't have the right pressure. They came in thinking there wasn't going to be much resistance, and when they opened the parachute, lo and behold, the parachute grabbed a lot more atmosphere than they thought it was going to be there. Everything malfunctioned. The attitude went bad. And they discharged the parachute, and only 3 seconds into a 30-second or 29-second burn of the rockets, they cut the rockets off because their inertial momentum unit was supposed to tell them what their altitude was, and it's so much pressure, so much atmospheric density up high, so it must be on the surface. So therefore, they cut off the rocket engine. The rocket, it was kind of confused with the radar. The radar said, "No, you're high." But in a split second, they turned off the engine and it fell 3.7 miles and crashed. Now that's $1 billion lander. So what I'm saying here is that there are consequences in terms of what's happened. And a lot of people, who have been involved with this may not be so anxious to come out and say, well, yeah, the pressure was a lot higher and we've been fibbing all along, because now you have people that put, $1 billion into a lander, or, countries that did that, and people that put years and years and years of work, and suddenly that thing is gone based on the fact they planned wrong. So, UFOs are part of it. Power, politics are part of it. Threat of lawsuits are part of it. It goes on. But maybe that's a long answer, but that's kind of what the situation is. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating that they feel they have to cover all this stuff up. I think humanity's grown enough probably to understand some of this. You know what I mean?
But even though you think you kind of understand, and maybe some of the listeners do understand, it'd probably be a good idea to go over why I think the pressure is so much higher on Mars than the government reports. So, and what do I think it is? So, the government says that the equivalent of sea level on Mars, which is called areoid, there's about 6.1 millibars of pressure compared to 1,013.25 on Earth. I think it's about 511 millibars, and I think that where the landers land, which they're the equivalent of way below sea level, like 3-4 kilometers below areoid, I think there the pressure is over 700 millibars, which is kind of like the pressure in Vail, Colorado. And if you go to the deepest place on Mars, it's about 1,050 millibars. Now, why am I saying all this? First of all, I'm going over the abstract in our report right now. I'm just going to pick out some points from that, which has grown a lot this week. We studied 8 years, every bit of Martian weather data we get our hands on. We have 1,760 Martian days or sols of weather data. So that's it's like 5 years. It'll be on August the 6th, but it's about 2.6 Martian years, a little over that. And the weather data from the Mars Science Laboratory is from the REMS team. REMS standing for Rover Environmental Monitoring Station. That's what's up there on Mars on the MSL Curiosity rover. We also looked at 8,311 hourly Viking 1 and Viking 2 weather reports. And we also looked at every technical paper we get our hands on, all NASA documents. We interviewed tons of people. This was not a quick search. This is 8 years of research I'm describing here. So we looked at all kinds of things, but we were initially struck by the fact that Viking 1 and 2 were supposed to not measure over didn't have the ability to measure over 18 millibars. For Pathfinder and Phoenix, the next two landers that had weather equipment on board, it was only down to 12 millibars, and for MSL it was supposed to be 11.5. So what we found was that MSL, we were seeing pressures published that were either at or above the 11.5 millibars. And these pressures, the weather reports are issued from Madrid, Spain, from Centro de Astrobiologia, if I can pronounce it right, over there. But that's where the REMS team is. So for a while they were actually putting out the weather in Spanish instead of English, even though they're working for NASA. But they finally got their English right. And we were seeing that, they were publishing these pressures that were too high. And as soon as they would do that, I and my son, we were monitoring this stuff. We would get a print screen of what they published. And then we have tremendously complex spreadsheets that detail everything they have, not only in the current Martian year and every day of it, but we can compare at the same point in the orbit, the previous year or the year before that, what was going on then to see whether things are lining up right. And we found that after a while there was a clear pattern. What was that pattern? That pattern was every time we pointed out something that looked like it was impossible, they went back and changed it. And so that was okay because we had the print screen before. We had the spreadsheet showing where we flagged it in color. And then we published the print screen after and showed, okay, here's after we challenged this. Notice how they went back and changed it. And it became a pattern. And the pattern was a really incredible pattern. I couldn't believe what I was seeing because, I live in Cape Canaveral, Florida. So, we watch the rockets take off here. But I don't work for NASA. And I don't work for any space agency or company or anything like that. I'm just a retired Coast Guard officer. And what we were seeing after a while was that the actual information the world was being given was running through a filter in my condo here. And through what I was publishing, or my son and I were publishing, and NASA was adapting. And they did this for the last 6 years, but they've done it to the point where now they are very aware of what I'm doing. And when I say very aware, the newest version of my report was just published last night. I've made a few typo corrections today on it, and it's up on both MarsCorrect.com, and it's also on my son's website, DavidARoffman.com. That's DavidaRoffman.com, 2 F's like Frank. So, they look and they see what's there and they change everything. Anyway, kind of going on a little bit here, but coming back to the evidence. All right, they started changing everything based on what we were writing. That should not be. I don't have any official function with the space agency. I would be more than happy to help them if they asked me. But last night I started to tell you, they came on my site, and they came on my site big time, to the point of like 50 readers between midnight and, noon or so today. and they're pretty much all NASA Ames. There's a few other folks that come on. NASA Ames is on our sites almost daily. In fact, most days it's on more than once. They, in fact, you got Larry on the phone there. And what I found was I opened one of the pages that NASA looked at, and, it actually, one page was the list of radio and TV shows I've done before, and I've done shows with you and with Larry before. But then the next page I opened down, had Larry on it, his page right there. And so I could see that, NASA knows that we're doing the show tonight. I don't know if they have the balls, if you pardon the language, I shouldn't say that, to call in. I would invite them to, especially Guy Webster, who's the public relations director at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Guy, I'd love to hear from you again. I really would. And by the way, Guy, I want to thank you for eliminating all Martian wind data, as I requested, 6 years ago, because it was all bogus, and you agree with me on that. And you also changed all the sunrise-sunset times to what my son David had calculated, because you had all wrong stuff there before. And anyway, I was just having a little fun with NASA here. So they changed everything. Well, then I found out that, lo and behold, Nathan calls me, and he lets me know that, hey, right before the Mars Science Laboratory touched down, the people at Finnish Meteorological Institute filed a paper, with the American Geophysical Union. And in that abstract, that's where it said not 11.5 millibars, but 1,025. Now, they did say it was optimized for 4 to 12 millibars. But optimized means, okay, they think they're most accurate, but they can clearly measure the higher pressures. So they lied to everybody in the general public for this time. Now, a couple days ago, I have this on the new report, they changed it again when they realized that the pressures I were challenging were like 12 millibars or so, where the instrument had maxed out. That's an average pressure for a day, so it had to be higher sometime in the day. So they went back and they changed it to 14 millibars after 6 years on the planet. These are the games that they play. These are the games that I catch. These are the games that I document. And frankly, NASA's listening in tonight, and I'm sure they are, as are U.S. military intelligence agencies and so forth. The message is very simple. The message is stop the lies. You don't have to admit anything about UFOs. Your question, Stu, was out a little ahead of where I want to be on this thing at the moment.
Okay.
But what they need to do is they need to stop the lies. And I've even provided in the report some pretty valid excuses they can use for where they made mistakes and why they were wrong, and I can explain those later. But they need to start telling people that the pressure on Mars is, in some places, as high or higher than it is on Earth. It's not like the moon. There's a blue sky on Mars. It took 36 years for NASA to change the sky color back from, butterscotch or red to blue. They finally gave us that when the MSL landed in 2012. And by the way, that blue sky color, Nathan Mariel's, when he saw the real color back then, that's what started him asking questions and why he contacted me. There have been an awful lot of people for a long time who have been insisting the sky is blue. Now, what color would the sky be if NASA were right? The sky was, if the sky was almost a vacuum like the moon, the sky would be black like it is on the moon. There wouldn't be enough air to scatter the light. It would be black. And so whether butterscotch, which it's not, or blue, you don't have the kind of pressure they're talking about. It would be impossible to have a blue sky in a near-perfect vacuum. So in terms of other things that went on, and why I got to the point that I got to, which we've kind of discussed before, but not everybody, I'm sure, has heard the show. We have weather anomalies on Mars that just didn't fit with what they were saying. So, for instance, with the Vikings and also with Mars Science Laboratory, basically every day around 7:30 in the morning with the Vikings at any rate, the sun would rise and, they would say, okay, we're going to turn on the cameras and we're going to film what's going on and we've got to do stuff. We've got to power up. So we're going to little heat into the unit because it's cold in the Martian night, real cold. And so let the heat in, and as they do that, the pressure would rise. Now, if they're measuring the pressure, the ambient air pressure, what's really out there in Mars, The fact that they let heat in from the heater, the radioisotope thermoelectric generator, RTG, should not affect the pressure. But if there was a dust clot, the dust got sucked in on landing, and the air can't get past that dust plot into where the pressure sensor is, then when you apply heat to the thing, it's a sealed container. The pressure goes up because it's like taking a Bunsen burner to a bottle that hasn't been opened. Yeah, so that's what happened. And now an hour later at 8:30 local time, the lander's nice and toasty, and so they can turn off their heater, and so the pressure goes down. And this is what was happening on a regular basis with the Vikings over 8,300 hours. 8,300 different readings, and we could actually predict what the pressure would be within 2% correctly, just based on knowing the temperature outside. There should be no relationship there whatsoever. So that's part of what we saw. The other things, real fast, the winds. They took for many years, decades, to tell us that sand moves. Now we see massive sand dunes moving around the planet. We see, in fact, they even turned the camera from one day to another day to look under MSL. They saw the sand had moved. Spirit rover had its tracks filled in. You need 80-mile-an-hour winds at the kind of pressure they're talking about to move the sand. And there was never, ever a reading of 80 miles an hour, on Mars. The highest was like about 57 miles an hour was measured on the Vikings. And that was just once over years. So that didn't make any sense. There's a mountain there on Mars called Arcia Mons. It's 17 kilometers high. And, it's like more than 10 miles above sea level, or the equivalent of sea level. And there are dust devils that are going on at the top. If they were right, they would be down to like 1 millibar pressure, a really strong vacuum. You couldn't possibly have weather there. But you have weather there. And you see these dust devils all over the place at altitude. So that says it's higher. There were storms, there were spiral storms over that mountain with 10 kilometers, like 6.25-mile eye walls. When it gets you get a dust storm on Mars, not a dust devil, dust storm. They can go global, but we can see where 90% or more of the light is blocked by the dust. If you had almost a total vacuum, there's nothing to hold the dust up. That didn't make any sense. We sent rockets up to Mars that were supposed to use aerobraking to go through a little of the upper atmosphere to settle into orbit. And they got hit with much more pressure than they should have, and they had to fire some rockets and readjust because that wasn't right. They found, most amazing, liquid water running on the surface of Mars in numerous places. They're called recurring slope linii. But what allowed us to nail the pressure at 511 millibars approximately was stratus clouds that were seen from the Pathfinder, and they were 13 kilometers above what the equivalent of sea level was. On Earth, those clouds don't form, with really, really low pressure. You got to go down to maybe 135 millibars. So we were able to back it up and figure out that that implied the 511 millibars at the areoid, the sea level equivalent, growing to 1,050 in hellaspace. But they just don't want us to know. And I don't want to focus too much on the UFOs. That's a whole different subject. And it kind of, for a lot of people, would decrease my credibility if I were to overly stress that. I touch a little bit on the possibility in the afterword of the report, but that's after all the data. I happen to know a lot more about UFOs, and frankly, I had somebody in my father's brother, may he rest in peace, actually back engineered what was found at Roswell. So I know what's going on with that, but that's a separate issue. And frankly, whatever they could use to try to bring me down, I'm sure if the decision is made, they don't want me to have credibility. They'll go after that. I do talk about that specific UFO bit of information I know on MarsCorrect.com, but I hide it under an article on Gilbert Levin. It's part 2, which is Gilbert Levin was the guy that did the labeled release experiments on Viking 1 and Viking 2, that found life up there. And it's also on my TerraCode site, which is arccode.com. But there I give the government plausible deniability or whatever. So in other words, they can look at that site and say, well, this guy has been writing about Torah codes and Bible code for 20 years. He must be a religious nut. So we can just, but that's deliberate on my part to put it there. But I do not put it on DavidARoffman.com. My son David is a PhD in has a PhD in physics. And so right now he's doing a postdoc at Yale. It's only medical physics, radiation therapy physics. But his condensed matter theory is what his actual PhD is. And he's having a hard time finding a job for after Yale because it may be because of what we write about Mars. But I certainly don't want to talk about UFOs on his site or have him do it because we want to see him get a job at some point. Now, whether that's possible, as long as NASA wants to hide the truth, I don't know. They want a kid, and this goes for anybody else that's looking out there for, anybody needs a physicist and somebody who can do outstanding work and really, get to the depths of everything that you can imagine in science. He's the kid to hire. But I don't know if NASA wants somebody that honest. If they want somebody who's honest and somebody who can get any mission done, then David A. Roffman is the guy to hire. And look at his website, DavidARoffman.com. His CV is up there, resumes and everything down to his diplomas, and he's got like 200 articles up there, breakthrough propulsion physics, Mars, and other stuff he's done. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's kind of the situation on why Mars is not what people think, and whether we'll get the truth out, I don't know. But you got another question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think that we are up there at all, and it's on a secret program?
Ooh, I do have on arccode.com an article about Mars base. Just because I saw the thing was kind of encoded in the Torah and people ask about it, there were some pictures a few years ago, and it was a dispute of whether or not it was a building or whether or not it was a defect in the film caused by a cosmic ray that hit the film. In terms of... certainly I've heard about all these alternative 3 ideas that were there. I've had people who've told me, but they're not 100% credible that we have something up there. Obviously, if we do, then we got there, and chances are pretty good with alien technology. And that gets into a whole other matter. Because if we're working with ET, then why don't we tell people? And then, the fear panic is one thing. If you read Philip Corzo's book, Lieutenant Colonel Corzo's book, The Day After Roswell, he makes it pretty clear that the military got a hold of stuff from Roswell, and then it farmed it out to industry. People could have come up with fantastic inventions, could claim it for themselves, could get patents and make money from it. It would help our defense, and increase our, the welfare of our economy. But they were not allowed to tell anybody. So for people like that, if somebody is known as a great inventor, and all of a sudden, they didn't invent anything, they got it from not the Martians, but I don't know where they're from is another matter. But if they got it from aliens that could get to Mars, then it's not their invention anymore, and they don't have a right to the patent. Chances are, and so you have the financial aspect that comes into play there. This gets back to why don't they want to tell us of what's there? The consequences are huge. And they go beyond that. There are real serious questions of criminality. Frankly, my best advice to NASA is, I've given you in the report the proof that anybody needs to see that Mars has higher air pressure. You had the Schiaparelli crash last year for the European Space Agency. They just published their inquiry, I think it was May 18th this year, report on what happened. And the report, quite frankly, very specifically cites as a probable cause problems with atmospheric density. In other words, and they also mention winds. But the winds, if you have almost no air, don't mean anything. So clearly, when that lander hit about, I guess it was around 3.7 kilometers when everything went to hell, and handbasket real fast. when it hit that, it encountered what it didn't expect. And, there's liability possibly there if they, unless they come out and say, okay, we made a mistake. If they made a mistake, to prove that it was not an honest mistake is very difficult. And I don't think that, I think if they have good lawyers, they could get by it. But if they continue to deny and deny and deny, I'll tell you what's going to happen. Now that the ESA knows the pressure is high, like I've been saying for the last 8 years, and by the way, they read my site almost daily, and they generally come to one article that's specifically addressed to them. If you look it up, you go under Desai. Prasoon Desai was a NASA scientist who said something's wrong with our atmospheric models on Mars, and he put it out as a challenge to the public. So I took the challenge along with my son. And that started 8 years of research. But man, I'm saying that because ESA knows now, European Space Agency knows the truth, and that's what likely caused their crash. When they go with their ExoMars 2020 lander, and along with the Russians, Roscosmos is who gives them the rockets for this stuff, and that's what happened they use Roscosmos, the Russians, for the 2016 lander, and they're going to use them again in 2020. That thing lands on Mars and gives the people on Earth the honest pressure. All NASA credibility will go out the window immediately. And they might be able to shut me up, but I don't know that they can shut up, the ESA and Russia. It's not a wise game to play. The smart thing is to stay ahead of the power curve and say, "Oops, we found a mistake. Thank you very much, Barry and David Roffman, for pointing it out to us, and for pointing out that some people, maybe at the Finnish Meteorological Institute and the REMS team, have not been totally honest with us. They can lay it on them, but then we'll know, okay, what's with Mars." In terms of their bases up there, though, as you're asking about, man, I think they'll try as hard as they can to squash that. And you know what? My older son is a rabbi who's in the Air Force Reserves. He has a geophysics degree from MIT. So I have two physicist sons. But he was, I was going to say, he kind of knows what was going on. I was going to say something else about it. Kind of slipped my mind here. But all right, well, let's leave that thought aside for the moment. Anyway, what's up there? I don't think our government wants to know, but I think they can't hide it forever. Yeah, I will say this much with my older son. He was exposed, as was my younger son, to what happened with the Roswell thing, and he went off in a different direction than my younger son did. Older son is 40, younger son is 24. In terms of religion, it affected both of them significantly, and the government may be concerned about that. But the older one became extremely religious and basically turned his back on science, and the younger one became less religious and very skeptical about everything. And I don't have a problem with accepting God and also accepting the fact that He made life on more than one planet. But for some people, that may be a problem.
Yeah, Barry.
Go ahead.
Barry, I was just going to ask you, did I ever send you that project?
The CD?
Red Star with Stewart Larry DVD?
Yes, you did. And I saw I saw the ruins there, what looked like ruins over there on that. So, yeah. Sometimes, pictures can be a little grainy. But, yeah, that's in terms of the whole Mars base and what's up there may be an awful lot. I mean, in terms of what's there, look, even when the Viking 1 orbiter was out there initially around Mars back in '76, they filmed the famous face at Cydonia. It looks like a sphinx in Egypt. And what the government did, they showed it, released it, was on all the newspapers around the world, from the best newspapers down to the National Enquirer and the tabloids and everything. But then they said, like a couple hours later, we looked at it again on the next pass and it wasn't there. It was an optical illusion or something. Well, the next pass happened to be long after sunset, and they could not possibly have seen it. So they started lying about that at that point. And but there's an agenda there, and I've touched on the politics of it. I've touched on the economics of it. I've touched on just how they want things managed. I mentioned that I have two sons that went in two different directions, both brilliant, but the one became more religious and turned his back on science, and the other one less religious, and I'm trying to get them to turn back, to religion right now. There may have been a thought that NASA might have had, or the government might have had, that if people go the less religious route and they don't believe in God, they might think, well, as the old cliche goes, without God, all things are permissible. And therefore, order in society might break down. So that could be a reason for what's going on. I really honestly believe that, they should make the announcements that they can. We've been hearing about disclosure for many years. I think it needs to happen sooner than later. I think that I would be more than happy to assist them in how to manage the information to get it out in a way that does not, knock things apart. People, of course, are always free to make their own decisions. But it's better if it's managed and it comes out sooner. As I said, if the Russians and the Europeans get there in 2020 and they just make their flat-out announcement, all hell can break loose. And, I guess there could always be attempts to sabotage that mission. I know what I was going to say with my older son before. That slipped my mind. When I sent him off to MIT, I met with the department head there, the geology department head, and I said, look, I give you this kid, he's brilliant. Give me back a guy that's capable of walking on Mars. They're certainly going to need a geologist. And in the last year of my son's school at MIT, he had orders. He was in Air Force ROTC, a Type 1 scholarship. He had orders to Space Command in Vandenberg, and I was thrilled about that. But then after he found out what we did, about what really happened at Roswell, and he just couldn't accept it. He didn't want to accept it, and he went off another way. And there's a whole long story with him. But it impacted him that way. So, how would it impact other people? Everybody's going to be different. It's like you take the same case before two judges, and one judge says the guy's guilty, and another judge says innocent, and we see that in politics all the time. Can't seem to get any agreement between the Republican and Democratic Party on anything whatsoever. So it's just the world we live in. So it's judgment call on the part of the government. I think they're running out of time now. I think 2020, unless they sabotage that mission. I don't know if they want to get into that, but unless they do something like that, I think it's going to come out sooner rather than later, and they ought to get ahead of the power curve and start telling us more. Go ahead.
What do you think about the TR-3B?
What I think about the TR-3B is this. Okay, I have some pictures of it on arcode.com, so if you look up arcode.com, ARKCODE, not C, not ARC, ARKCODE, arcode.com, and you just do a search, Google for TR-3B on that site, and you'll see photographs that I analyze of a sighting of it out west. And I'll tell you I hate to say this, but who the most frequent visitor of that is the Kremlin. Now, when I say that, how do I know? I know because every single day, not so much with ArcCode. There are a few, when it comes to ArcCode, I might have 100, 200 people that come on a day. At the end of the day, I'll just do a search for .ru in terms of who the readers were. .ru is Russia. So if Russia comes to look at anything there, then I see, well, what did they read? And within the last week or two, they've been to TR-3B, and they've been there every few months for a long time. There's nothing new I can give them on it. The analysis seems to show that, the chance that it's a real thing. But it's not a conclusive article on it. With respect to NASA, the same way with them, not so much on artcode.com. I do see Ames there sometimes 5-6 times a day. They've gotten an interest in Torah codes. Either they're religious or they think the code's from aliens, or they think the code's from somebody in the future. I heard your entry, spiel there about the future is, it's out there if you know where to look. Well, yeah. So I think Ames is looking at that possibility. I don't know that they've gotten all that religious, but at any rate, TR-3B. They look. With NASA, I do record when they come to my sites, and however, I do not record their full IP address. And the reason that I don't record their full IP address and I do record the Russians' full IP address is this. A lot of my friends work for NASA, here in Cape Canaveral. I'm not interested in screwing anybody in NASA, as long as they're honest. If they want to, but I do advise them, if you're going to come to my site, don't do it from a government computer. Because if you do it from a government computer, you're going to get logged in. I will take off the last 2 or 3 digits of the IP address, but you're going to get logged in. So that if it ever comes to a case where I have to go in the court of law, I can say exactly who's been to my site, read what, when. Now with the Kremlin, when they come, or Roscosmos comes, I have no loyalty to anybody in Russia. And frankly, I make available to the U.S. military every once in a while. Plus, they know how to get into my site and find where the addresses are. And there's, I believe it's about 700 or so. It could be more than 1,000 readers from the Kremlin and Roscosmos. With NASA, I think the total is somewhere closer to 1,400. I applied to be a science advisor for Trump. I got a funny card in the mail that said I'm on the Trump Presidential Advisory Board. Doesn't mean anything except the fact I gave some money. But I really think I should work for the White House in that capacity. And on my application letter, I put a direct link to all NASA and Russian readers, Kremlin readers, so they could know. And if anybody ever says anything, well, the Russians were looking at you. Well, yeah, I published it right here. They're reading my stuff. I'm not talking to them. So, and I gave it to DOD. DOD's at my site all the time. I don't record DOD addresses, or at least I don't post them. I know who they are. I know exactly who they are, and they're pretty good, loyal fans. And sometimes we play some games with each other. In terms of if I ask a question and I'll say, if this is true, hit me with a reverse IP address that comes up as Nanjing Astronomical University. And sure enough, I see the next day, there's Nanjing or Harbin or whatever I asked for. I see, an IP address that traces back there. So they don't talk to me directly, but I get answers that way sometimes. So it's games that are played. I think they appreciate what I'm trying to do for them, and they're obviously interested. In terms of where the ultimate loyalties are, I hope it's to the Constitution of the United States of America. That's where my loyalties lie. But obviously there's all kinds of people with different agendas.
Well, what
Larry, you got any other questions?
Well, I was just curious about the tie between the backwards engineering from Roswell to the TR-3B and high technology.
Well, I'd have to look up let me look up the article over here. I don't know that I have that. In terms of, obviously, Roswell was like around July 4th, 1947, just a few weeks after I was born. TR-3B, we've been back engineering stuff forever. I'm going to see if I don't think I have that specific time, the time of the site.
That's okay.
TR-3B.
I'm just curious what you thought.
.com, but in terms of how long we've been working on it, and if you look up that Gilbert Levin Part 2 article on Mars Correct, or you look up Roswell on our code, you'll read about the fact that when my uncle was involved in the thing, there was a meeting in Tokyo and Osaka in March 1960, and at that meeting were all our top engineers who were involved in back engineering. It was a non-destructive testing convention. But besides the fact that all the Americans who were there were in that field and our allies were there, there were also three people from the Soviet Union, one from Poland. They're named, in my article. So that's 1960. So by 1960, at the height of the Cold War, when everybody thought that the world was lucky to not get into a nuclear war. The reality is there were people who knew what was going on, and we're working with Russia on a common threat that they perceived and trying to back engineer that. Now, in terms of how far they went, is the TR-3 a product of that? I can't really. I just don't have that information. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff, and whether there's bases on Mars and so forth. I can't prove that. I can just prove that the pressure on Mars is not what the government says, and I urge them to at least own up to that and go from there. Now, if there's some place they don't want us to see on Mars, I suppose they could do what the military does here: declare a certain area of the planet off limits, restricted, whatever, for whatever reason, and just say, if you come down there, we're going to shoot you down, or something like that, and keep people away. Go explore some other nice, peaceful part of the planet. But it's a big planet. The surface area of Mars is equal to the surface area of all the land masses on Earth. So, I mean, we do have the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, provides a lot of great pictures. I mean, God, the fact that we can see where the back shell of landers or the parachute, wound up on the surface, and all this other stuff. We have pictures of the Schiaparelli crash that time-lapse pictures that show the crash, basically, as it happened. We've seen...
What's your take on the Russian probe that kind of disappeared up there
the one
around Phobos?
I know the Phobos Grunners one. I think the crash always confused that one versus the name of the actual one that did that. Obviously, there was a cosmonaut came to the U.S. and said that they had pictures of a UFO, taken just before the crash. Was disputed. There were supposedly shadows that were seen over the surface of Mars that looked big, and I think somebody tried to say, well, that was just a shadow from the moon, from Phobos or whatever was passing over the planet. The fact that it was Buzz Aldrin came on CNN. This is on my site. I have the video on the site. 61 seconds. He's on, not CNN. It was C-SPAN. He came on and he's rambling on about we should go to the asteroids and the moons of Mars and so forth. Then he like 47 seconds into the video, he puts a finger up and he says there's a monolith on one of the moons of Mars. He's talking about Phobos, and he's asked the question, well, who put that there? He says, well, I don't know, the universe put it there, God put it there, whatever. And you see a hand reach over in front of him. There was a transcript that he was supposed to discuss. Somebody yanked the transcript from him. He's looking up. You can see. I mean, he was pushing the envelope, like I do sometimes, probably tonight. And 61 seconds after, the video started, about 14 seconds after he said there's a monolith on Mars, on the moon of Mars, they cut him off. But the video got out, and and it's on my site. And so if you just look for Aldrin, if you look at artcode.com, if you look at marscorrect.com, if you look on David's site, I think the video's over there also. It's on all of them. And my message on that is that people ought to be aware this is what he said. And was he sane? Was he having a problem with alcohol when he said it? Whatever it was, I mean, people can try to make excuses. This was the second man to walk on the moon, and he's not the only astronaut who said that UFOs are real, or words to that effect. But he's on record with that.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Because they do immediately try, it's kind of like when they dig up a giant skeleton or something that disappears right away, and it gets ferreted into some, probably like, the Indiana Jones movie where it ends in this giant warehouse where you could never find anything.
I'm sure we have
Larry,
a few warehouses out there.
Got any questions?
Yeah, Barry, I was just going to ask you to just mention something for a minute. You had a very intriguing Torah code called Warning Sent from the Future, and of course you did redact a little of that, and
well,
we're
you
aware
helped me
of that,
on that, my friend.
I hope
Larry,
so.
I appreciate what you did. All right, so let me sum it up for the people and what they can find, and what why I changed it, and that's after you saw it and other people saw it. The Kevin Gallagher, who did that show with me, he saw the original Matrix. Here's what happened. I went to the library August last summer. I think it was August the 1st. It was the day I paid my mortgage. And so I was driving my son's car, which I normally didn't have down here. This is right before he graduated with his doctorate from the University of Florida. And I walked inside, dropped off one book, looked at the science fiction stack. Took about 30 seconds or a minute to find a book that I hadn't read before. And it was called Slant by Greg Bear. And checked it out and walked outside. Now, when I went in the library, where I parked at the library, the Cape Canaveral Public Library, there was nobody on that side of the parking lot. When I came back, there was a gentleman who had parked his car 2 spots to the left of me. But when he got out of his car, which of course would have been the left side of his car, he didn't walk in the library. Instead, he walked around on the right side of his car, and he positioned himself between his car and my car so that I couldn't get into the door without going through this guy. And he looked at me. I'm generally dressed in a Coast Guard retired hat, and either I'll have a Coast Guard shirt on or a Navy, that'll be a Coast Guard ship shirt or a Navy ship shirt, because I spent 34 years total in both services. He said, "Thank you for your service." And I said, "Well, were you in?" He said, "Yeah, I was in during the Vietnam War." So I said, "Well, thank you for your service." And I thought it was going to be the end of it. But, I like to talk, and somehow he got me into a conversation. And he asked about 2 things, and he started talking about 2 things in specific that didn't catch my attention as much then as it does now. One was nanotechnology, and the other was artificial intelligence. And when he brought these subjects up, I did recognize immediately from the book I just picked up and reading the inside flap that the book was about nanotechnology and artificial intelligence. And I said, "Well, that's odd. That's strange. I just picked up a book about that." So we got into a discussion, and a little while in the discussion, I told him somewhat about what I did, and it became increasingly apparent to me that he knew of who I was. Now, I do TV shows, and I do radio talk shows, and I've been on the History Channel, but still, this guy seemed to know something about me. And at one point, I asked him if he was from the NSA. And by the way, it looked to me like tonight there was somebody very close to the NSA who was on my site. But that won't say NSA. It'll just be up in the Fort Meade area in Maryland. They come on. But I asked him. So he said, "No, I'm not in the NSA." But he didn't say he wasn't in any other intelligence. Well, the reason why I asked him was I pointed out, and I'll name it over here right now. I'll give you part of the picture. The most interesting reader that plays games with me with reverse IPs is Fort Huachuca. They're an Army intelligence base in Arizona. And so I said, one of the things that really bothers me, I've got this Fort Huachuca that's always coming on my site. So immediately he stopped me and he corrected me. He said, "It's Huachuca." I said, "How would you know?" He said, "Well, I was stationed there for 3 years." Okay. I said, I'm also troubled by the fact that a lot of times, it looks like the White House is coming up on my site, but it's the South Lawn. I said, it must be just a generic map spot they pick for Washington, if they don't want you to know where it is. I mean, I've seen other cities that'll happen for. Tokyo, it's usually City Hall. Beijing, it's about 3 blocks north of the Forbidden City. So there are generic sites some of these people. But he immediately said to me, "Well, that's where Marine One lands." So I said to him, "How would you know?" He said, "Well, it took me a while to get my clearance, but I worked at the White House for 4 years with Marine One." So now it's really getting interesting. I think that was the point where I asked him if he was NSA. And there came a point where he began to listen to me talk a little bit more, and he said, "I know somebody like you." And he said the government came and took his computer, and they put child pornography on it. Then they came and they accused him of having it on there, and he never owned a computer after that again. And my response was not a friendly one at that point, to say the least. But, things calmed down, and the conversation resumed, and it finished on a friendly note. And, I had one, as I drove away, I knew he was from the Maryland area. One reason that I knew what was that I mentioned on the reverse IP address thing. I mentioned to him that I had put an article up on ArtCode, and it was about Clinton and Snowden, and the fact that, you know, people think Clinton was wanted for president, but Snowden did the same thing, or, you know, and he was wanted for treason. You know, so as soon as I mentioned that, I mentioned the place. I thought it was the Lincoln Institute, but it is Lincoln Technical Institute. But I said something was wrong, like I did with Echuca, and he corrected me again. But the thing about the Lincoln Technical Institute, when I looked up to see who that was, I always look up reverse IP, and the reverse IP for them took me into Echuca. But when I looked at the address on the Lincoln Technical Institute, it was Snowden River Parkway. So here I just put up an article about Snowden, and Fort Huachuca is playing games with me with a Snowden in the address, and they've done this a few times. But this became a game. What really bothered me, however, lately, where I put up the future warning article, was that, you know, David at the time, you know, of the encounter had just gotten his degree, and his PhD thesis was on nanotechnology. But I didn't recognize that. I didn't make the connection back then. But now at Yale, he's working with artificial intelligence. And so the two areas that he got into that were really heavy, this man asked me about immediately. You know, and now the fact that I had a book in my hand about it, you know, that kind of troubled me for a while. And then finally I asked the question, how could he I could see how he could follow me. I thought, in fact, I started to say, when I drove away from him, I thought maybe there's a bug under the car. I thought about getting an oil change to look under to see if it's there. But then I figured, well, he could also trace me by my cell phone. I never did it.
Yes.
I never got the car. Isn't driven that much. Well, my son's at Yale. The car's down here, you know. So you know, it sits in the garage most of the time till he gets back down. But then it suddenly occurred to me that, you know what? When I checked out that library book, there's an electronic record, and the record would be of when I checked out the book, where I checked out the book, you know, and what, you know. Of course, you can see what the book is about. And so if that, let's say 30 years in the future, whether it's my son who does it or somebody else who does it, somebody in the future who's interested in meeting me would be able to say, okay, well, here's the time that, you know, Roffman was at the public library, and this is the book he checked out. So you can go and start a conversation on the subjects of this book. And you know, but that would be a signal from the future. Now, I then looked up the term in the Torah codes, Ot Me'atid, which is signal from the future. It's encoded 10 times. And for one of those times, on the 7th time it's encoded, I will tell you the man's first name was Joseph, which of course that occurs 180 times in the Torah. Joseph is a major subject in the Bible. But his second name was directly under his first name. His last name was right there. And, you know, that was striking. And then below that, a couple lines. Below that was the equivalent of G. Bear for Greg Bear, the author of Slant. And then a few lines down that below that was the word book, and, you know, at like open text. And it was all in 136 letters against odds of 17 million to 1. So I published it initially. And, you know, and Larry, thank you very much for publishing it. But then I started to think about it, and I thought, you know what? If this guy did get a signal from the future, people are going to drive him nuts. And if somebody lost somebody let's say in 9/11, they would want him to go back and, you know, give them what they can, send a signal back to save their people, and drive the man absolutely insane. So I decided to pull it down, and I asked, and Larry, you found on the site where I wrote that it took it down, and you took down. We didn't take down the whole article; it's still there, future warning, but I blacked out the man's last name to give him some privacy. Okay. And so
how can people reach you, Larry? We got about 30 seconds left.
Okay, you want to meet? You said Larry. You mean Larry or Barry?
I mean, yeah, you.
Okay, all right. They can reach me on my blog at artcode.com, ARKCODE.com, or I have a blog at marscorrect.com. However, I very seldom see anybody there. I think that's controlled largely by the Department of Defense Network Information Center. But they can get me that way. If anybody has a job offer for David A. Roffman, they want an outstanding scientist who knows everything that's going on. I mean everything. He's at Yale right now, but if they'll contact me at arccode.com, again, ARKCODE.com at the blog, then I can hook them up and with somebody who literally the kid may have the key to the future. I mean, he knows. Well, he's followed everything.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. We got to have you back. And thanks,
Thank you
Larry.
So much.
We're at the end of the show here. I gotta sign off. Well, thanks again.
All right.
Larry.
Everybody have a great night. Thanks for having me on again.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye now.